The courtroom was silent to silent. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights above, the rustling of jackets, the low click of a camera lens being focused. Then, with a loud slam of the gavel, Judge Roberts broke the silence. "Ms. Bondi," he said, voice cold and steady, "for violating the court's gag order. You are hereby fined $70,000. Further defiance will result in contempt charges." A hush fell over the room like fog rolling in. Everyone looked at Pam Bondi. She didn't blink. On the outside, she looked calm, blonde hair brushed neatly, black blazer crisp, hands folded on the table in front of her. But inside, her heart pounded like a war drum. Her jaw clenched slightly. Her fingers stiffened under the table. She didn't look away from the judge, not once. Every reporter in the room took note. Pam Bondi, once Florida's Attorney General, now stood accused of breaking a gag order. But she wasn't the one being charged with a crime at least not officially. She was defending 3 young women victims of abuse inside a private detention facility that had deep political connections. The kind of connections that made people disappear. The kind of money that bought silence. She had held a press conference a week earlier. She had spoken with passion, with fury. She hadn't named names. She hadn't revealed any classified documents. But she had spoken about the pain those women endured, the nightmares, the violence, the silence that had followed for far too long. And Judge Roberts didn't like that. He called it reckless, irresponsible. He said she had risked the integrity of the trial, that her public comments might sway the jury, taint the evidence. But everyone knew what this was really about. She was being punished for speaking truth. As the words of the fine echoed in the courtroom, Pam could feel the eyes on her rows of journalists scribbling notes. Camera crews quietly filming from their assigned spots, families of the victims watching with hope and fear. She stood slowly. A ripple of tension moved through the room. "Scree." She looked directly at Judge Roberts. "Scree." Her voice was calm, steady, but it carried something sharp beneath it. "Your Honor," she began, "I do not regret what I said. I regret that these women were silenced for so long. And if the price of giving them a voice is $70,000, then so be it." The judge narrowed his eyes. Pam took a step forward. "If you think that fine will make me stop, then you don't understand why I'm here," she continued. "I looked those women in the eyes. I promised them they would be heard. If that promise costs me $1 million, then fine me for." $1 million gasps spread across the courtroom like wildfire. A young woman in the back row, one of the victims, covered her mouth. A reporter dropped his pen. Even Judge Roberts, stone-faced and unreadable, blinked twice in surprise. Pam's hands trembled slightly as she reached into her briefcase and pulled out a single letter. "I wasn't going to share this," she said, holding it up, "but today I will." Without waiting for permission, she began reading. It was from Sophia, 19 years old, one of the victims. In it, she wrote about the cold nights inside that place, the fear, the way no one listened, no one believed her, until Pam did. Pam was the first person who didn't look at me with pity. The letter read, "She looked at me with purpose." She made me feel human again. There wasn't a sound in the courtroom. Even the camera stopped clicking. Pam finished the letter, folded it carefully, and placed it back in her bag. "I spoke because they couldn't," she said. "And I will not apologize for that." For a long moment, no one moved. Judge Roberts stared at her. The air in the room was tight, thick with unspoken words, unasked questions, and quiet awe. Pam sat down. Outside the courthouse, a crowd was forming. News had already spread across social media. Live clips of her statement were being posted and shared within minutes. The press conference that had led to the fine now seemed small compared to what had just happened. Back inside, Judge Roberts cleared his throat. "This court is adjourned," he said quickly, slamming the gavel again as if trying to regain control. But it was too late. The courtroom wasn't his anymore. "Not really." The moment Pam stood up and refused to be silenced, something shifted. This wasn't just about a gag order or a fine anymore. It was about power, about truth, about how far someone would go to protect the vulnerable and how far others would go to keep things buried. As Pam walked out of the courtroom, past cameras and flashing lights, she knew this was only the beginning. A silent war had just begun. And silence was no longer an option. The storm outside the courthouse hadn't calmed, it had grown. Overnight, Pam Bondi's defiance became the headline on every major news network. News anchors debated the legality of her actions. Pundits praised or condemned her. But the one thing no one could deny, Pam Bondi had struck a nerve. By the next morning, a national interview had been scheduled. Not with a sympathetic outlet, but with Gideon Voss, an aggressive journalist known for exposing hypocrisy on both sides. The kind of interviewer who smiled with his mouth and stabbed with his questions. Pam agreed immediately. The studio was ice cold, its walls thick with years of secrets and scandals. She sat across from Gideon beneath the burning heat of the camera lights. A makeup artist had dabbed powder across her cheeks, but it couldn't hide the exhaustion beneath her eyes. Still, she sat tall, steady. "We're live in 3, 2. The red light blinked on. "Pam Bondi," Gideon began with his trademark smirk. "You stood in court yesterday and told a federal judge you'd rather pay $1 million than stay silent? Are you a hero or just reckless?" Pam didn't blink. "Do heroes follow the rules when the rules protect monsters?" she asked. "I didn't break the lie," broke silence. "Some say you're endangering your own case. That you're compromising the trial by making this personal." Pam leaned forward. "Of course it's personal. I've sat with these girls. I've listened to what happened to them. I've seen the files, the facility buried. I've watched this system hide behind red tape while girls were broken." Gideon hesitated. That wasn't in his prep. "What do you mean? Files the facility buried?" Pam reached into her jacket and slid a small folder across the desk. "There are sealed records from 2019 intake logs that show falsified entries. Missing hours, guards unaccounted for." The camera zoomed in as Gideon opened the folder on air. His face changed. A flicker of real surprise. "These haven't been entered into evidence yet?" he asked. "No," she replied. "Because the facility's parent company has political backing that goes all the way to the Department of Justice." Silence. The interview had taken a turn no one expected. The control room behind the glass, pain erupted in movement, producers whispering into earpieces. Someone scrambling for fact-checkers. Gideon straightened his papers, regaining his footing. "Pam, you're accusing a private detention contractor with federal funding of hiding systemic abuse. Are you prepared for the war that will come with that?" "I'm already in it," she answered, voice low. He nodded slowly. "And Judge Roberts?" Pam paused. "He's not the enemy, but he's protecting a system that silences victims. Under the guise of procedure, he thinks I broke the rules. I think the rules were built to break people like Sophia." There it was again, Sophia. In that moment, millions of viewers watching at home weren't just thinking about lawsuits or gag orders. They were thinking about that girl, 19 years old, locked away, afraid. Pam was turning the legal case into something else's movement. The segment ended, cameras cut, but the conversation didn't. Outside the studio, 3 men in black suits waited. They didn't speak, just handed Pam an envelope. It was marked "Immediate Compliance, Federal Oversight Division." Side was a warning. Her license could be suspended. Her actions were being reviewed by a special committee. A motion was being filed to limit her ability to speak publicly about the case. She was being shut down piece by piece. Pam stared at the paper, her fingers trembling slightly. But her eyes remained cold and clear. She folded the envelope and handed it to her assistant. "Get me a copy to send to the press," she said. "Are you sure?" "Very." Back in her car, Pam sat in silence. Her phone buzzed, nonstop reporters, allies, strangers offering support or threats. But one message stood out. A text, no name. Just, "We know about Langley. Stop talking. Or next time, it won't be a fine." Pam stared at it for a long moment. Langley. Something old. Something buried. Her heart picked up speed. This wasn't just about the girls anymore. Something bigger was unraveling. Something dangerous, and somehow she was at the center of it. She took a deep breath and whispered, "Let them come." By the third day, Pam Bondi's war had gone beyond the courtroom. The air around her was electric, too still, too tense, like the moment before a storm hits. Outside her small downtown office, news vans were parked bumper to bumper. Journalists loitered on sidewalks waiting for her next move. Inside, her legal team worked in hushed tones, heads down, phones hot with incoming messages. But something else had arrived that morning. It's a small, padded envelope. No return address. No postage. Stamp. Pam opened it alone in her office. Inside was a flash drive. And a note. Before Langley, there was Greenridge. They knew. So did Roberts. Pam plugged the drive into her private laptop, heart thudding. The screen filled with documents. Time-stamped videos, internal memos from the private detention corporation Greenridge Holdings. A name she already knew too well. She'd gone after them once as Florida Attorney General, but the case had vanished under federal pressure. Now, here it was, laid bare. Illegal detentions, surveillance footage of assaults, emails between executives. And DOJ officials. And were several messages copied to a name she hadn't expected. Judge Martin Roberts. Pam sat back slowly. Her mind reeled. The judge who fined her, the same man who had publicly condemned her for violating a gag order, had once received emails from the very corporation she was fighting. One line caught her eye in particular from a company lobbyist. "Roberts understands the stakes. Keep him in the loop until this media problem dies down." Her hands shook. The media problem was her. She had always thought this case was dangerous, but now it felt radioactive. A soft knock pulled her from the screen. It was her assistant, Asha. "There's someone here," she whispered. "Says he used to work for Homeland. Won't give a name." Pam's eyes narrowed. "Bring him in." The man who entered wore a cheap coat and sunglasses, even indoors. He looked exhausted, not physically, but morally. It's like someone who'd carried too much for too long. "I don't have much time," he said, without shaking hands. "They'll know I came." "Who are you?" Pam asked. "Doesn't matter. What matters is that you're circling something they've buried since 2015. And if you're not careful, you won't survive this." Pam didn't flinch. What happened in 2015? Greenridge wasn't always a detention contractor. Before that, they ran black sites off-books holding facilities. One of them was in Langley, Virginia. Disappeared detainees. No oversight. And one whistleblower got out with documents. And he was murdered. Car crash, official story. But I've seen the file. Judge Roberts was part of the legal task force that buried the investigation. Pam's heart dropped. "Why? Come to me. It's because you're the first one stupid enough or brave enough to say it out loud. You said you'd pay $1 million to give victims a voice. Now you need to decide if you're ready to risk your life for the same thing." He stood. "One last thing," he said. "They're going to come for you legally first. Then they'll come for your clients. And if none of that works," he didn't finish the sentence. He just left. Pam stared at the door, mind racing. Then back at the screen. Emails, videos, evidence, and a name connecting it all. Roberts. She had to act. Within hours, she called another press conference, this time on her terms. No courtroom, no filters, just truth. The room was packed. The lights were hot. Microphones buzzed. She stepped to the podium and paused. Then, clear and steady, "I was fined for speaking out, threatened for protecting victims. But the real question is, Why is a federal judge protecting a corporation accused of abuse? Why is a sitting judge receiving confidential updates from that corporation's lobbyists? The crowd shifted. Camera zoomed in. Pam dropped the flash drive onto the podium. This contains everything, and it's being sent to every journalist, every oversight committee, and every international watchdog willing to look. Gasps. Reporters yelled questions. Pam held up a hand. This isn't just about justice. It's about power. About who gets to speak and who gets silenced. Judge Roberts wanted me quiet. He wanted this case to disappear. But today, the silence ends. Chaos erupted in the room. That night, the footage played on every major network. By morning, an emergency Senate Ethics Committee had announced a review into Judge Roberts' past ties. And somewhere in a dark office, a man picked up a phone. She didn't fold, he said. Escalate. The war was just beginning. By the next morning, everything changed. Pam Bondi stood in front of her bathroom mirror, toothbrush in hand, as the TV behind her played news segments on repeat. The banner read, "Bombshell Allegations. Bondi accuses federal judge of corruption." The news anchor's tones had shifted. Less curious, more cautious. She knew that voice. The one the media used when they weren't sure which way the wind would blow. Her phone buzzed. "Pam," said Asha, her assistant, voice strained. "You need to see what they just posted." Pam clicked the link. It was a breaking story from a national media outlet, one usually careful, quiet, exclusive whistleblower lawyer Pam Bondi under investigation for misuse of funds. She stared at the headline. Beneath it, accusations of campaign finance violations from her time as Attorney General. Old claims, long disproven, suddenly resurrected. Conveniently, she called her former campaign treasurer. "They're rehashing stuff from 10 years ago." "Pam," he said, "it's garbage. We cleared all this. That's not the point," she said quietly. "They don't need it to be true. They just need people to doubt me." Pam walked into her office and found a grim-faced team waiting. Aja had printed the article, marked sections in red. Her lead researcher had pulled up other stories' op-eds. Social media attacks, even clips of former rivals calling her reckless and emotionally unstable. "They're trying to frame you as an attention seeker," Asha said. "Not someone to be trusted with sensitive evidence." "Classic smear strategy," Pam muttered. "Attack the messenger. Bury the message." "But that's not all," said Marcus, her private investigator. "Last night, someone broke into one of our clients' apartments." Pam froze. "Sophia?" she asked, already knowing the answer. He nodded. "Nothing taken. But drawers ransacked. They were looking for something, or trying to scare her." Marcus slid a photo across the table, a crude note written in lipstick across Sophia's mirror. "Don't play hero." Pam leaned back, breathing slowly. Her thoughts turned to the man from Homeland, the one who warned her. First legal, then the victims. Then her office phone rang. It was unexpected. When she answered, the voice was deep, controlled, male. "You've made a mistake, Ms. Bondi," the caller said. "This wasn't your war to fight. Who is this?" "Someone who's seen too many heroes buried under headlines. You need to stop before this burns everything down." Pam's voice was ice. "Then maybe it needs to burn." Click. That evening, she received an invitation she didn't expect. A live primetime interview on Global Affairs Tonight, the kind of show watched not just by Americans, but foreign diplomats, international NGOs, the intelligence community. Pam hesitated. "This is your chance," Asha told her. "They're painting you as unstable. Show the world the truth. Show them why this matters." Pam nodded. "Book it." Hours later, under the glare of television lights and a cautiously neutral host, Pam faced the world. "Ms. Bondi," the host began, "you've accused a federal judge of complicity in a corporate abuse cover-up. You've been fined, smeared, and now investigated. Why not just walk away?" Pam didn't blink. "Because I've sat across from women who begged me not to. Because they've been ignored for years." Because silence is how this system survives. The host leaned forward. Do you have proof? Pam turned to the camera. I do. And now? So, do you? She held up the flash drive, a second copy. The full Green Ridge file has been sent to international human rights organizations, the UN Special Rapporteur, and the European Court of Justice. This case is no longer confined to a single courtroom or one judge's control. There was a pause, the kind that hangs just before something massive shifts. Then the host asked, "You're escalating this to the global stage?" Pam's answer was quiet but certain. I didn't escalate it. They did when they chose silence over justice. I'm just making sure the world sees it. By the end of the night, Pam Bondi, Green Ridge, and #judicial cover-up were trending globally. And somewhere deep inside the Department of Justice, senior official picked up the phone. We've got a containment problem. He said, how bad? She took it international. The response came cold. Then we take the gloves off. The next morning, Pam Bondi sat alone in her office, staring out the window. The city looked calm like any other day, but she knew better now. What seemed peaceful could be hiding storms. Her phone vibrated again. Hundreds of messages had poured in overnight. Some in support, others threatening. One had simply said, "You should have stayed quiet." Asha came in pale and holding a tablet. "They've leaked your private medical records." Pam turned. Slowly, what? CNN's holding back, but one of the smaller networks published it. They're framing it like you're mentally unstable, referencing anxiety meds from years ago after your mother died. Pam exhaled, her shoulders stiff. They're not trying to win a legal case. They're trying to break me as a person. It's psychological warfare, Asha said. They're targeting you from every direction. Marcus walked in next. We've confirmed the source of the leak. It's not random. It came from a sealed file. Inside the Office of Federal Judicial Conduct, Pam stood up. That's under the judge's jurisdiction. Exactly. Pam clenched her fists. It was Judge Roberts, quietly, methodically. He was weaponizing the system against her, but he wasn't alone. Later that afternoon, Pam received a call from a blocked number. This time the voice was familiar. Female, Southern accent, low, and controlled. "You're not the only one they've come for," said the voice. "They did it to me 2 years ago. I stayed silent, but I kept records. Who is this?" "Someone who sat on the same bench as Judge Roberts. Check your inbox." The line went dead. Seconds later, an email appeared. Subject: Green Ridge Bactional Attachment. Internal memos. Marked privileged communication. Dozens of them. Pam opened the first. It was a chain of emails between Roberts and a lobbyist from LMG Holdings, the corporation behind the Private Detention Center. They were discussing funding packages and cooperative strategy during court exposure. It was clear the judge had received benefits, maybe not money, but favors, endorsements, access, and it was all time-stamped. She brought it to her legal team. "This isn't just unethical," said her counsel. "This is criminal. Bribery, obstruction, federal charges." "We need a secure channel," Pam said. "If we leak this, they'll bury us before it hits the air." "There's one option," Asha said, pulling out her phone. "Encrypted drop to the Guardian's investigative unit in London. Once it's out of U.S. jurisdiction, they can't kill it." Pam nodded. But they were already too late. 2 hours later, their office lost power. Then internet. Then cell signals jammed. It wasn't a coincidence. Marcus appeared from the hallway, out of breath. "FBI just walked into the building," he said. "They've got a warrant for seizure of all digital files related to Green Ridge." Pam stared at him. "They're using national security statutes. Emergency surveillance order. Something about sensitive classified material. They're saying your leak compromises public safety." Pam's breath caught. "They've labeled the victims' testimonies ... as threats." She realized then this was bigger than she thought. It wasn't just Judge Roberts. It wasn't just LMG Holdings. The government was involved. It had become a liability to something far more powerful. As agents moved through her office, collecting hard drives and locking down files, Pam stepped into the hallway. A young agent met her gaze. "You should have stopped while you could," he said, barely a whisper. "They don't lose," Pam replied without blinking. "Then they've never fought someone who doesn't quit." Before they could take everything, Marcus had slipped the memos onto a burner phone and passed it to Asha. She hid it under her coat and walked out casually, vanishing into the late afternoon crowd. That night, The Guardian released the story anyway. Headline: U.S. federal judge linked to private detention funding scandal. Social media exploded. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse. UN spokespeople issued statements calling for an independent investigation. Judge Roberts gave no comment. Pam gave no apology. But inside his chambers, Roberts made a private call to a contact at Homeland Security. "She won't stop," he said. The reply came cold and low. "Then we won't either." And across the ocean, in a quiet room in Brussels, an international tribunal official opened the file. The case was now global. And Pam Bondi was no longer just a lawyer. She was a threat. The sun hadn't risen yet, but Pam Bondi was already awake. She stood at her apartment window, coffee in hand, watching flashing lights below. Media vans lined the streets like a siege. Her name was on every news channel. Her face filled every frame, but this wasn't victory. The story had gone international. Yes, The Guardian had exposed the links between Judge Roberts and LMG Holdings. Victims had stepped forward with more accounts of abuse. Protests had erupted in D.C., Miami, and even London. The world was watching. But that only made her a bigger target. At 6:13 a.m., her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "They've issued a federal summons. Today, noon. Bring counsel." Pam knew it wasn't just about questioning anymore. They were building something against her. A legal trap. If she wasn't careful, they could bury her in procedural charges, discredit her, destroy her ability to practice land silence the women she represented. At 11:58 a.m., Pam entered the federal courthouse under heavy security. Protesters outside cheered her name. Others jeered. Inside, a team of 4 federal attorneys waited, all dressed like ghosts, calm, crisp, emotionless. One woman stood, introduced herself as lead prosecutor Sloan Mercer. "We're investigating the unlawful transmission of classified materials related to national detention policy. Ms. Bondi, are you aware this carries a maximum sentence of 25 years? Pam didn't blink. "Yes, I've read the law." Mercer slid a folder across the table. "Then you'll understand why this next document is deeply problematic." Pam opened it. It wasn't about the whistleblower case. It was an affidavit signed by a former intern from Pam's old campaign team alleging that Pam had once instructed staff to ignore background vetting for a donor linked to LMG Holdings. It was a lie, but a cleverly timed one. "This is absurd," said her lawyer. "That document has no bearing." Mercer raised a hand. "It shows a pattern. Improper handling of sensitive material. Questionable judgment. Possibly corruption." Pam clenched her jaw. "You're trying to flip the narrative. I exposed corruption, and now you want to paint me as corrupt." Mercer leaned in. "You're not the story anymore, Ms. Bondi. You're the problem." When the questioning ended 2 hours later, Pam exited the courthouse to a new headline. "Breaking: Pam Bondi accused in donor vetting scandal linked to detention, case it spread like fire." That night, she returned to her apartment to find her door already open. Inside, the place was untouched. Nothing stolen, nothing out of place, except a single object on her kitchen table, a printed screenshot of her mother's grave, circled in red ink. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just about politics. It was personal now. Whoever was behind this, they weren't warning her to back off. They were telling her it was already too late. Pam reached for her phone, her hands trembling. She called Asha. They were here. Asha was silent for a moment. "You're not safe. Not leaving, Pam," said firmly. "They want to scare me into silence. Okay, I'm not giving them what they want." "Then we go bigger," Asha replied. "Not just one article, not just one leak. We dump everything. Names, meetings, flight logs, finances. We turn this into a firestorm they can't control." Pam stared at the screenshot one more time, then nodded. "Let's light the match." By morning, Pam's team had launched Project Greystone, an anonymous data drop compiled with help from European journalists and former intelligence contacts. It exposed years of silent cooperation between judges, private contractors, and lobbying groups funneling money through fake nonprofits. The documents hit the internet like a bomb. Judge Roberts issued an emergency order trying to suppress the leak, but it was too late. The files were archived on servers in Iceland, Norway, Kenya. Mirror sites popped up within minutes. And then something strange happened. A video surfaced. Grainy, clearly filmed on a hidden camera, Judge Roberts in a private meeting speaking with two men in suits. The audio was muffled, but one sentence came through clearly. "Pam Bondi needs to be discredited before the tribunal picks it up." It was undeniable. He wasn't just biased. He was orchestrating a takedown. The fallout was instant. Congressional committees demanded Judge Roberts step down. Civil rights groups filed motions. Protesters camped outside the courthouse indefinitely. But with the storm came escalation. Pam received a secure email from an international contact. Subject: Red Channel activation, 48 hours message. Foreign interference confirmed. UN tribunal is moving. You'll be contacted by a neutral intermediary. Be ready. If you stay in the country, they will silence you. Pam looked at the message, her mind spinning. The U.S. legal system had failed her. Now the world was stepping in. But so were the people trying to stop her. 48 hours before everything changed. Or ended. The cold wind cut through the Washington air as Pam Bondi stood beneath the marble arch of the U.S. Capitol steps. It was just past midnight. Flashing red and blue lights painted shadows across her face, but she didn't flinch. Not. This time, she'd come here knowing it might be her last walk as a free woman in this country. By now, Project Greystone had ignited a global firestorm. Judge Roberts had been placed on temporary leave. International tribunals had formally opened preliminary hearings into corporate-backed judicial corruption in the United States. The United Nations issued a formal inquiry. Pam had received messages of support from whistleblowers across Europe, Africa, and Latin America. Women who saw in her a symbol of courage. But support didn't mean safety. Inside the rotunda, a secret session of the Senate Judiciary Committee was being held. A handful of high-ranking officials, alerted by the United Nations Emergency Red Notice, were reviewing the data dump. The goal determined whether Pam Bondi was a threat or a martyr. Back outside, Aja approached quickly, coat flapping. "In the wind, we just got a ping. Someone leaked a sealed deposition from Roberts's inner circle." Pam raised an eyebrow. "What does it say?" "It wasn't just Roberts," Aja replied, her voice low. 3 federal judges. 2 members of Homeland Security. LMG Holdings funded black site detention facilities overseas. Not just women, children too. Pam closed her eyes, her breath catching. The corruption ran deeper than she feared. "What happens now?" she asked. Asha didn't answer immediately. Instead, she handed Pam a manila envelope. This came from the intermediary, the tribunal. They're ready to offer you temporary protection, exile if needed. Pam opened the envelope. Inside was a new passport, a secure route through Canada, and a list of contacts who would provide shelter abroad. Exile, Pam repeated quietly. You mean run? No, Asha said. Mean live, so you can keep fighting. Pam looked down at the Capitol dome, glowing in the night. Somewhere in there, deals were being made, reputations destroyed, powers shifting. But she hadn't come this far to disappear. Her phone buzzed. A live alert from a newsfeed. Breaking Senate. Judiciary calls emergency vote to open federal investigation into Roberts. Bondi gag case, then another, international media. Pam Bondi to testify before UN Council on Human Rights. Within 72 hours, Pam smiled faintly. They're not going to bury me, she said. Asha gave a cautious nod. Not unless they try to do. It'll live on air. They both turned as a black car rolled to a stop at the curb. Out stepped a UN liaison Suarez, a tall man with a clipped British accent and diplomatic immunity. Ms. Bondi, he said with a nod, your testimony has been fast-tracked. They want you on record before this becomes an even larger crisis. The tribunal will hold its first open session in Geneva. Cameras will be rolling. Pam blinked. You want me to go global? I want you to finish what you started, Suarez replied. Inside the car, Pam sat in silence as the city lights flickered past. Outside, protesters chanted her name. Some angry, some hopeful. Not the private airfield. She paused at the top of the boarding stairs. This was it. One life behind her, a new one ahead. But before stepping into the jet, she turned to the waiting camera crews. A journalist held up a mic. Pam, do you have any last words for the American people? Pam looked directly into the lens. I never asked for this. I never wanted a fight like this. But when you see injustice, when you see women silenced, children forgotten, truth buried under profits, you only have two choices. Walk away. Or walk through fire. She paused, her voice steady and sharp. I walked through the fire, and I'm still standing. The engines roared to life. The screen cut to black. But for the world, it was just the beginning. Pam Bondi wasn't just defending victims now. She was leading a movement.